You're afraid to be yourself. Tell me, when did it become dangerous to just be you? Not the version that smiles at the right time, not the version that nods politely, keeps their voice soft, and makes everyone else comfortable. Not the one who says the right thing, at the right volume, at the right moment. I'm not talking about the you they trained you to become. I mean the real you, the one that's raw, messy, uncertain, unapologetically honest. The one that laughs too loud or asks uncomfortable questions. The one that doesn't fit neatly into anyone's expectations. When did that become something to fear? Maybe it was the first time someone told you you were too much, too emotional, too quiet, too intense, or not enough, too small, too sensitive, too weird. Maybe it was the moment someone looked at you with disapproval and your body instinctively shrank to make yourself more acceptable, less noticeable, more likable. Somewhere between growing up and trying to fit in, you absorbed the belief that authenticity was a liability, that being real meant being rejected, and ever since, you've been shrinking, hiding, apologizing for your feelings, your needs, your existence. But here's the quiet truth: you were never too much, you were just true. You scroll past perfect lives, filtered bodies, curated personalities shaped to look effortless but engineered for approval. And without realizing it, you start to feel the quiet pull. Be more like them. Be less like you. It doesn't scream. It whispers, subtle, consistent, convincing. You don't even notice how the world slowly teaches you to perform, not for joy, but for survival. You start laughing when something inside you is hurting. You say yes when your whole body wants to say no. You nod in agreement to avoid conflict even when you disagree. You chase accomplishments that don't even matter to you, not because they're meaningful, but because they're accepted. Because in this modern world, being liked has replaced being known. Even in societies that preach be yourself, there's an unspoken script. Be this kind of individual, want these kinds of dreams, express yourself, but not too loudly, not too boldly, not too weirdly, and above all, don't be too real. You learn quickly that authenticity has boundaries, one set not by your heart, but by social comfort zones. And so, you begin to disappear inside yourself, not all at once, piece by piece, until what's left is a version of you that's palatable, polished, and deeply tired, because pretending is heavy. Wearing a mask day after day takes a toll, and the weight of not being yourself, it doesn't just vanish. It builds. It seeps into your chest as anxiety. It plays on repeat in your mind as overthinking. It creeps into your evenings as quiet despair you can't name, but deeply feel. You don't need to be more like them. You need to remember what it feels like to be you, unfiltered, uncurated, unapologetically alive. Carl Rogers once said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." It sounds simple, like all you have to do is embrace who you are and everything will fall into place. But here's the quiet truth no one ever tells you. You were never taught how to accept yourself. You were taught how to adjust yourself, how to be digestible, how to shapeshift. You were taught to shrink your laughter when it echoed too loudly, to soften your opinions so they didn't make others uncomfortable, to dim your brilliance unless it served someone else. You weren't being fake. You were learning how to survive, because once upon a time, being accepted meant safety, and being rejected by family, by friends, by community meant emotional exile, meant danger, meant loneliness. Thousands of years ago, to be cast out from the tribe was a death sentence, and your body still remembers. That's why, even now, in a world full of likes and views and algorithms, your nervous system can't tell the difference between not being liked and not existing. The fear feels the same. That's why you overthink every message before you send it, why you rehearse conversations in your head for hours, why you scan your reflection, searching for the version of you that might finally feel like enough. It's not vanity, it's not weakness, it's self-preservation dressed in anxiety. You're not obsessed with how you're seen because you're shallow. You're terrified of disappearing, of not belonging, of being forgotten. But here's the paradox. The only way to stop living in fear of rejection is to stop rejecting yourself, to stop editing your truth just to earn a space in someone else's story. Because the moment you finally say, "This is who I am," is the moment you begin to truly live. But let's pause here, because there's a quiet moment most people miss. A moment that doesn't arrive with drama or noise, but with a subtle ache, a gentle tension in the chest. a whisper too quiet for the world to notice. It's the moment you realize that the mask you've been wearing, so carefully constructed, so diligently maintained, isn't protecting you anymore. It's suffocating you. The version of yourself you created to earn approval, avoid rejection, and stay safe has become a cage. You wear the smile, you say the right things, you keep things light, palatable, smooth, but deep down something's cracking, something inside is pleading for air, and maybe that something is your true self, pounding on the walls, saying, "Let me out." Maybe the anxiety isn't a personal defect or a malfunction of the mind. Maybe it's a sacred signal, a message from the parts of you that remember freedom, the parts that once danced, spoke loudly, felt deeply, and didn't ask for permission. The ache, the tension, the restlessness. What if none of it is random? What if it's your soul trying to come home to itself? This is the beginning of rebellion, not the explosive kind, not the loud, dramatic, chaotic version we're used to seeing, but the sacred kind, the kind that begins in silence, the kind that starts when you stop, when you finally step back from all the roles you've been performing, when you pause the endless proving, when you get quiet enough to hear the truth again, not someone else's truth, not what the world told you to value, but your own quiet knowing. And in that stillness, something unexpected rises. Not confusion, not shame, but recognition. A flicker of clarity, of memory, of you. Not the mask, not the edited persona, but the self that existed before the world taught you to filter your light. You begin to feel yourself, raw, honest, unfinished, alive, and it doesn't feel like a breakdown. It feels like a return. This is not collapse, it is emergence. It is the moment the performance ends and the real story begins. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to survive, to belong, to be seen as acceptable in the eyes of the world. He never said the mask itself was the problem. It's a necessary part of life, of social interaction. We all wear one, but the real danger, he warned, isn't in wearing the mask. It's in forgetting that we're wearing it at all. It's when the role becomes your identity, when the performance becomes so seamless, so constant, that you begin to confuse it with who you really are. You've worn that mask for years, smiling when something inside you ached, laughing to smooth over tension, agreeing with things that made your chest tighten in silent resistance. You told yourself it was easier, more polite, more strategic, but over time, you compromised so much, so often, that you began to lose the thread of your own truth. You couldn't tell the difference between your real desires and what was expected of you. You started living on autopilot, shaping yourself to fit every room you entered, until one day you looked around and realized you didn't know what you actually wanted anymore. And yet, beneath it all, there's always been a voice, a small, steady whisper saying, "This isn't who I am." That voice tried to speak every time you felt drained after saying yes when you meant no. It rose up in moments of quiet when the performance faded and all that remained was your inner discomfort. But each time you were judged, misunderstood, or rejected for showing something real, that voice got quieter. Each time you were told you were too sensitive, too intense, too bold, too different, that whisper dimmed a little more, until you began to believe it too, that your real self was something to hide, not to honor, that your authenticity was a liability. But the voice never disappeared. It waited beneath the mask, beneath the roles, beneath the fear, still whispering, still hoping you'd remember, not who you were told to be, but who you've always been. Let's break the spell. The one that says you have to earn your place in the world. The one that convinced you that love must be chased, that your worth must be proven, and that your truth must be filtered to keep the peace. It's time to let go. Let go of the need to be understood by everyone, because not everyone is meant to understand you. Some people will only ever see the version of you that makes sense to them, and that's okay. You don't need universal approval to live a meaningful life. You don't need to bend yourself into something more acceptable just to be invited into spaces that were never built for your wholeness. Let go of chasing love by becoming a chameleon, constantly shifting colors to match the room. You were never meant to disappear into other people's expectations. You were never meant to shrink your feelings to fit into someone else's comfort zone. And let go of seeking permission to simply exist as you are. Your existence isn't something to apologize for. You don't need to earn the right to take up space, to speak your mind, to feel what you feel. That right was yours the moment you were born. Authenticity isn't about being fearless. That's the myth. Real authenticity is about being honest, especially when you're afraid, especially when your hands are shaking and your heart is racing and your voice feels too small. It's about showing up anyway. So speak even when your voice trembles. Say no even when it disappoints them. Cry even if they think it makes you weak, because none of that makes you broken. It makes you real. And the greatest act of strength, it's not perfection, it's not power, it's not having it all figured out. The greatest act of strength is this: to stop running from yourself, to stand still, to look inward, and to say, without shame or hesitation, this is who I am. You are not your curated feed, not the highlight reel you post to prove you're okay, not the carefully filtered photos, the measured captions, or the well-crafted image designed to keep up appearances. That's a reflection, a surface, but it's not you. You are not your job title, your resume, or the metrics used to define your productivity. You are not your followers, your income bracket, or your relationship status. And you are most certainly not the opinions others projected onto you, the ones that told you who you should be, how you should act, what success should look like. You are what remains when the noise fades, when the applause dies down and no one is watching. You are the child who once dreamed without shame, who imagined impossible futures without censoring herself. You are the soul who, even now, still craves truth more than validation, who longs to be real more than liked. And when you begin to reclaim that version of you, the raw, honest, unpolished core, you don't become perfect. You become magnetic. Not to everyone, not to the masses, but to the ones who see you, the ones who recognize something in your authenticity that calls out to their own, the ones who aren't interested in your performance, but in your presence. You start moving differently, speaking differently, choosing differently, because when you stop living for approval, you start living on purpose, and every step you take from that place becomes clearer, quieter, more powerful. And that difference, it isn't rebellion. You're not resisting the world to be edgy. You're not acting out of defiance. You're simply realigning with who you were before you were told to be something else, with your values, your voice, your vision. That shift, subtle but seismic, isn't noise, it's clarity. It's you coming home. There is a kind of silence that doesn't mean emptiness. It's not the silence of loneliness or absence. It's the silence of precision. The quiet that comes when the noise of performance fades, when you no longer have to explain yourself, prove yourself, or soften your edges just to be accepted. It's the kind of silence that feels like a breath you've been holding for years, finally released. When you stop shapeshifting to fit into spaces that were never designed for your truth, something profound happens. You begin to choose, not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of alignment. You begin to love differently, not from a place of need, but from overflow. Your love stops being a transaction for safety or belonging. It becomes a gift, a reflection of the fullness you've cultivated within. And from that place, the way you relate to others begins to shift. You no longer tolerate relationships that dilute you. You stop bending to stay connected. Instead, you start building connections that reflect you, your values, your vision, your actual voice. You become quietly unavailable to those who only ever knew the mask, to those who only stayed close when you were convenient, small, or pleasing. They start to fade, not because you hate them, but because you've simply outgrown the version of yourself they were attached to. And in that sacred solitude, in that quiet, unfamiliar stillness where your nervous system finally begins to settle, you meet someone you've been missing, someone you've forgotten in the pursuit of being acceptable. You meet you, not the curated persona, not the version who got applause, not the one who was always fine, but the real one, the one with cracks and softness and still beating dreams, the one who is not perfect, not polished, but finally, fully, beautifully whole. So let me ask you one last time, who are you when no one is watching? What truth have you been waiting to speak? What version of you have you kept hidden behind likability, success, or silence? Because the world doesn't need a more polished you. It needs a more present you, a more honest you, a more alive you. If this spoke to the part of you that's been waiting to exhale, write in the comments, "I'm ready to be real." And if you're ready to go deeper, The next video will show you how to turn that fear into freedom. You're not broken, you're just buried. Let's dig.